the next day I interviewed at Imagineering, and they didn't have a job opening at Imagineering, but a lot of the skill sets applied. And there was a guy named Terry Dobson who, no, not Terry. Was a producer that was working at Interactive and at Imagineering,
Mm-hmm.
and he saw that I had some crossover skills,
Mm-hmm.
and so he introduced me. He said, "Hey, why don't you come in Imagineering and have a meeting with me here?" And this was before the layoff happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, "This is kind of weird, right? Because you have an office in the Interactive building."
Yep.
So I went over there and I got to meet a couple of people, and so sure enough, like he was, really helping me out. And so the very next day, I had already scheduled an interview at Imagineering with a VP there. And that took a couple of months to
Yeah.
negotiate because they also, again, didn't have a job opening. And I had to interview over the course of a few months with different people. And then, so that summer I ended up drawing Daredevil Deadpool.
Oh, no
like
way.
the annual, and New Mutants, like a miniseries, and because I still had and I did like a couple issues of Cable,
Mhm.
so I still had the connection with
Marvel
and I knew that, and Mark Powers was still there, and so I knew that I wanted to keep busy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then by I think November, Imagineering, we had worked out another contract. So then I started working there. So I was at Imagineering for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And that was a great experience.
Mm-hmm.
Designing rides for the theme parks.
That's so cool.
I remember going into...
that's a way to use your architectural degree and your creative side.
Well,
and
yeah, it was a combination of architecture and storytelling, comic books. A big part of it was comic book storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you go to these rides at Disney...
They're narratives.
They're narratives. They're all stories. It's
Absolutely.
all story-based. That's why, like, if you go to Disney, it's very different than, like, a Knott's Berry Farm or a county fair or something. Because those are just, like, kind of
Rides.
thrill rides,
Yeah.
right? With painted green to represent the Hulk or something.
Mhm.
Or, But Disney has a particular...
Storytelling aspect to it where
Yes.
you're getting a beginning, middle, and end with a
Right.
story. You're seeing these characters you know and love, and
Yeah.
hearing a story whether you know it or not.
And everything is composed and designed to push that narrative.
Of course.
So the queue space is a great example because the queue space, although people don't like waiting in line, it's part of the... while you're there, if you're going through Indiana Jones, right? As you're going through the tunnels, everything is designed to put you into that story, into that time.
Yep.
And there's the bamboo stuff, there's the little relics, there's different hidden things. So that by the time you get onto the ride vehicle, you are already in that world.
Yep.
And so it's completely believable. And when you get done with it, you want to like kind of go back on the ride again and re-experience it and from a different vantage. Every time you go on, there's different
It's a new
things.
experience.
Yeah. But you're in that world, so you kind of forget about everything else. Space Mountain, same thing.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that was like at Imagineering, I was Blue Sky Design. So Blue Sky Design is I think my personal favorite.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the best thing because you work on projects that don't have a ceiling, so they call it blue sky.
Oh, wow.
Right? There's no ceiling to the project because you're starting at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You're basically starting with a blank piece of paper, if it's a piece of paper.
Yeah. You start with an open canvas and you can
Exactly.
kind of mold it to whatever you want.
And sometimes when you're working on stuff and you pitch, a lot of it is you're working on stuff and you have to pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Pitch to executives or corporate sponsors. So you have to be able to talk about your work and talk about your idea. Not just through the images, but also verbally communicate. But when you're... sometimes you might have an idea and then it doesn't resonate, right? But then what happens is if it doesn't, it starts forming the outside of what the inside could be.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're starting with, like, you don't know what it is.
Yeah. Do they give you an IP, or are you like just kind of like?
And back then, it's not even like an IP really, because they had not. This was like pre-Pirates of the Caribbean.
Okay.
When Pirates of the Caribbean movie came out, that's when they really started to formulate a lot of, implement a lot of the movie properties into the theme parks.
Of course.
So prior to that, it was still very they didn't do that a lot.
That's crazy.
And like the first project I worked on in Imagineering was Autopia. Autopia is the ride in Disneyland where you drive the cars, right? And that's typically the first time any American or any kid ever drives a car.
Yeah.
Is like you're 3 or 4 or 5, and that's the first time you get to sit behind a steering wheel. And even though it's a guided rail course,
Or you're not doing anything.
right? But there's a gas pedal,
Yep.
right? And that had been one of the oldest attractions at Disneyland at the time. So they were looking at retrofitting it and putting it, changing out all the cars, because the cars are all this old gas engine, and it was emitting all this pollution into that particular area. One, because it's going 365 days a year. I don't know how long the parks are open a day, 12, 14, 16 hours or something. So it's crazy.
Yeah.
Right. So that we gotta do something with the cars. Otherwise, we gotta shut it down. So they wanted to bring in a corporate sponsor, and then it was a team. Usually, it's a small team. So like you have 1 or 2 designers, maybe 1 or 2 producers or writers, and said, "This is Autopia. We're gonna redo it. It's an e-ticket attraction. So they had different levels of attraction, which meant more money would go into developing it. Come back in a few days, and so let's see what ideas you have." So at that time, I started from interactive. I started drawing on the computer a lot, like on a Wacom tablet and stuff. So everybody else at Imagineering were these older traditional painters and artists. I was the youngest guy. Everyone was like 40, 50 years old. I was like 25, 26 at the time.
Wow.
So I would come in with these digital printout paintings, and then they would have like their traditional paintings. And so it stood out a little bit differently, because I felt like if I was going to go down and start painting stuff and try to be like them, that's not why they hired me too.
Yeah.
They hired me because I'm like young and I'm supposed to provide a different perspective. Right?
Absolutely.
So like if we're still doing the driving course, but the thing was to look at the world through the eyes of the car. And so as you're driving through and you see a gas station, well, to us it's a gas station, but to them it's like a burger joint or something. If we see a car wash, it's not a car wash, it's a spa, or little things like that.
Yeah.
And then maybe there's like bird wires. So there's audio
speakers in it.
No. Animatronic birds.
Oh, wow.
The poop.
Haha, no
so
way.
You have to like avoid. So there's some component where you're driving off the rail.
Oh, that's fun.
So it's just like different ideas like that, and then you try to weave some kind of narrative and story through that.
That's so cool.
Then you meet with the corporate guys, and you get dressed up and you do all this stuff. So it's a lot of fun.
That's cool.
Like
yeah. It's cool to kind of learn the story of how these rides are made and what that process is like.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go into these creative meetings. Sometimes you just go into a creative meeting. You're there just to provide ideas for someone else's project. And you're in a room, like a huge room, and everyone there, they all designed the rides that I went on as a kid.
That's crazy.
And that I loved.
Grew up, yeah.
Yeah, so it was a little daunting.
Yeah.
At times.
I can imagine. Yeah.
I'm trying not to look stupid and say stuff like.
They're like, no, we did this 20 years ago.
Exactly. That's like my thinking. It's like I'll wait till like almost towards the middle to end of the. I didn't want to wait till all the way to the end.
Yeah.
Right, but I'll wait till like the middle to 2/3 of the way through, and then I'll start saying stuff.
Yeah.
Come up with ideas. So I'll listen to what everyone else is saying, and then try to figure out
what's missing or
what's missing, what they haven't brought up, and if I can bring it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But
that's life.
Yeah.